In the Luna 2 Archon quest, we used Nefer's chess set to look into Rari's past to understand what happened to him and why he became one of the 5 sinners. Here, we saw Horoptatyr, Rarir, Rheinaltyr, Surdologi, Werner Volnir, and Dainsleif all portrayed as chess pieces. Except, there is one thing that distinguishes Dainsleif from the others. His chess piece is a human. That immediately made me wonder what the other chess pieces might symbolize. In a way, portraying the sinners as objects and animals rather than humans shows that they have changed after obtaining abyssal power. This is a reasonable explanation for this, as Dainsleif, the only one to not wield abyssal power, is also the only one portrayed as human. In this video, I'll be looking into each specific chess piece and I'll be sharing my findings about their symbolism. I hope you enjoy! Horoptatyr, the Wise. Let's start with the sinner that we have the least amount of information about, Horoptatyr. At a first glance, the mask on his chess piece reminded me of the typical iconography that is used to indicate theater, and that is the comedic and tragic masks. I struggled to find information on these masks besides their origins, so this didn't get me very far at first and honestly led me to a dead end. That's when I remembered a different place where we've seen a theatrical mask, and that is Piero's symbol in the Fatui. But unlike Horoptatyr, whose mask is smiling, Piero's symbol is frowning and has a tear on it. And that's not even the only dichotomy that can be found between them, as their titles also mirror each other. Piero is called the Jester, which is also often referred to as the Fool in Commedia dell'arte, where the Fatui names come from, and Horoptatyr's title is the Wise. But could this really explain Horoptatyr's chess piece? What is the connection between one of the 5 sinners and the director of the Fatui? In order to figure this out, I decided to dig deeper into Piero's backstory, and I ended up at the circlet piece of the Pale Flame artifact. In the description of this artifact, we get a quote from Piero that reads, "Since my level of learning could not compare with the sages, I failed to earn the favor of the previous ruler. So too did I fail to stop them from tearing away the veil of sin, ushering in a tide of divine wrath, destruction, and foolishness. Then I shall become instead a fool, a fatus, and devote myself to Her Majesty, who understands my pain." From this, we can derive that Piero experienced the cataclysm in Conria. But more interestingly is that he says he failed to compare with the sages to earn the king's favor. And who happened to be the most favored by King Ermin? That's right, Horoptatyr. Horoptatyr's name, which is also an epithet for Odin, also literally means sage, yet again connecting him to Piero's quote. Horoptatyr, the Wise, was the president of the Universitas Magistrorum, a place for knowledge, whereas Piero, the Jester, is the director of the Fatui, a word that literally means fools in Italian. One of them caused the cataclysm, and the other feels like he failed his homeland for failing to stop it. It makes perfect sense then that one of them would be smiling and the other one would be frowning. The connection between these 2 characters does not seem like a coincidence to me, and it could explain the relation between Horoptatyr's chess piece and the 2 masks typically associated with the theater. Verweer, Reger of Solnari. Verweer's chess piece shows a wolf with a crescent moon behind it. At first, I felt like this chess piece was a little too on the money with the association between wolves and the moon, which is very well known and used in many modern media. But after doing some research, I feel like the symbolism runs a little bit deeper than it might seem at first glance. First, it's definitely linked to his title, the Reger of Solnari. During his life in Conria, Verweer worked as an assassin that was tasked with eliminating anyone with ties to the Crimson Moon dynasty. Solnari is the previous name that the iridescent moon had before it became the Crimson Moon. So, simply put, his title means the Avenger of the Iridescent Moon. That's kind of the first and obvious link that Verweer has with the moon, and wolves are often associated with the moon. But in my opinion, a simple game of association is not enough to explain the symbolism of Verweer's chess piece, and that brings me to my second point. I believe this chess piece is symbolic of Rary's transformation after the Cataclysm, which can be linked to werewolves and the Wild Hunt. As we know, Rary became corrupted by abyssal powers after the Cataclysm. When the Traveler meets him in Not Cry, he is pretty crazed and intent on using any means necessary to achieve his goals. This is similar to how werewolves are usually portrayed as beings that can transform from humans into violent, wolf-like predators. Because of this transformation, Wild Hunt monsters started appearing around Not Cry that look like zombies, or more accurately, revenants that have risen from the dead. Rising from the dead after being killed is actually a trait that werewolves also have in certain folklore. But if we look at real-life folklore, the Wild Hunt is basically a chase led by some kind of mythological figure, followed by ghostly figures. Dogs and werewolves are also often part of the hunt, and the name of this folklore motif involves dogs in many cultures. Since Rarir brought forth the Wild Hunt in Genshin, it makes sense to then depict him as a wolf. Basically, Rarir's connection to werewolves can be seen in both a symbolic way and a literal way through the Wild Hunt, and not just through the moon. Rheindater, gold. Rheindater's piece shows a one-horned horse, also known as a unicorn. In most cases, unicorns are said to represent purity, and their horns are seen as very special objects that can detect and protect against poison, as well as be used for medicine and healing. Drinking out of a unicorn horn is said to make the person drinking it immune to poison. What's especially interesting about this is that the Philosopher's Stone, which is the goal of alchemists like Rheindater, shares the same properties as the unicorn horn. In alchemy, the Philosopher's Stone is believed to be capable of curing any disease, and can even be used for an elixir of life that grants immortality. Unicorns are also sometimes depicted as the god or element Mercury, which is considered the first matter needed to make the elixir by some alchemists. This first matter is also sometimes referred to as poison or venom, and in order to create gold, it needs to go through a transmutation process, which includes purification in the albedo stage, which is the second out of 4. Despite the connotations with purity, cleansing, and healing in both alchemy and unicorns, all of Rheindater's creations, besides albedo, are tainted by the abyss. For example, the Rift Wolves, Durin, Bakunawa. In that sense, the purity of life can be seen as corrupted, which seems kind of ironic with the unicorn visual. However, it looks like unicorns can also be associated with evil, as seen in this quote. And take heed unto yourself, O man, and beware of the unicorn, who is the demon. For he plots evil against man, and he is cunning in evil doing. I think this dual meaning is pretty interesting, as it's kind of hard to see someone who caused as much destruction as Rheindater as someone who's fully associated with purity. In the description of Cinnabar's spindle, Albedo's signature weapon, there is also mention of a unicorn in a quote that's presumably said by Rheindater herself. You must pursue that which your elder brother, the one-horned white horse, could not accomplish. Reach the far side of philosophy and create a new destiny for myself and your brothers. Personally, I believe this quote is aimed at Albedo, and the one-horned white horse is, in this case, subject to Rheindater's failed attempt from her primordial human project. Regardless of whether that's true or not, it is yet another connection between Rheindater and unicorns. Surdology, the Fowl. Surdology's chess piece shows a sword inside a shattered stone. This initially reminded me of that sword in the stone attraction in Disneyland, but that attraction is obviously based on an existing story, and that is a legend about King Arthur. In this legend, there exists a sword in the stone, which looks basically the same as the chess piece. The wizard Merlin, who put the sword there, says only the rightful heir of the throne of Britain would be able to pull out the sword. I think it makes sense to portray Surdology this way, as he was the strongest person in Conria who was able to beat all of his opponents. Arthur and Surdology are pretty similar as well, as in the story of the sword, Arthur comes from humble beginnings. Sir Logie was born in a prison as both of his parents were criminals, and he spent most of his childhood wandering the streets. Yet, he kept fighting. And Arthur obviously became the King of Britain. The sword also makes sense with the origins of Sir Logie's name. His name comes from the Norse mythology figure Surtur, who wields a flaming sword and is foretold to battle against gods. Anyway, despite the similarities between the Arthurian legend and Sir Logie, I don't feel like the chess piece just represents Sir Logie as a person. It also represents the goal that he has for himself that we learn about in Skirk's story quest. I think Master also craves a battle like that. One where his opponent forces him to use all of his strength, unlock the extent of his potential, and transcend his own limits. A battle to end all battles. So, the sword in the stone is, in this case, not just a representation of Sir Logie himself, but an invitation to any worthy warriors, specifically to Skirk. Vedner Volnir prophesied that Sir Logie would find a disciple from outside of Tibet, and Sir Logie seems to believe that Skirk will be able to defeat him one day. In other words, Skirk will be the one worthy enough to pull the sword from the stone. Vedner Volnir, the Visionary. Vedner Volnir's chess piece shows a round snake with a 4-pointed star in the center. The snake is very similar to the serpent Ouroboros, except for the fact that it's not biting its own tail. But regardless of that, I still believe that this chess piece is trying to represent Ouroboros. Generally, the Ouroboros stands for eternity and immortality. This makes sense with Vedner Volnir, considering he is a visionary whose prophecies have never once been wrong. The fact that Ouroboros stands for immortality comes with another dimension as well, and that is because Vedner Volnir predicted the fall of Conria. After the fall, the survivors were cursed to be immortal. The chess piece almost feels like it's kind of mocking this fact. Both Ouroboros and Vedner Volnir are very much linked to time and the future. And in alchemy, Ouroboros even represents an eternal cycle of destruction and recreation, which might be linked to the Abyss or the Abyss Order. Honestly, I really struggle to figure out what the 4-pointed star in the center of the snake might mean in connection to the character, but I will tell you everything that I found. In alchemy, the Ouroboros basically means the one that encompasses everything. There are many illustrations where Ouroboros is depicted with the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, and air. This is what alchemists believe the world consists of. This makes sense with the 4-pointed star in the chess piece, where each point could represent one of the elements that are recombined into a unity within the Ouroboros. But what the relation between this and Vedner Volnir is hard to say. What we do know is that the Ouroboros represents time, unity, and eternity, and those things are very closely linked with Vedner Volnir. So, these are my thoughts about the symbolism of each chess piece. I think the pieces that were chosen for each sinner fit them very well, and I really like doing research into the symbolism. Portraying the sinners as objects and animals was definitely a deliberate choice, and I hope this video provides a good explanation for the symbolism that they might have. If you have any other thoughts about what these chess pieces might mean, let me know in the comments. For now, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and then I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Thanks for watching! Bye bye!